for taking that on. So Gru, we started these 3 days together focused on the ways in which development is being redefined, the way in which we look at it today. And we felt we had to close with you because we wanted to close with you, but you're the person who caused the last sea change in development. It was the commission that you led that got known as the Brundtland Commission, and the report that you issued that got known as the Brundtland Report, and this is 25 years ago.
Yeah, even more, yeah.
And where you put forth, by the way, Gru just celebrated her birthday, so we're thinking in terms of time. You put forth the notion of sustainable development, and then you defined it. And you defined it as pursuing a pattern of development that allowed current generations to meet their needs while preserving the ability of future generations to meet theirs. And I wanted a sense from you of how are we doing? How are we doing based on that roadmap that you put forward more than 25 years ago?
Well, so first, I think there's reason to underline the fact that you are asking the question and that people across the world in political, NGO, civil society, and educational institutions all are aware of the concept, aware of the basic importance for the future of the world and for humanity. That is a kind of a major breakthrough if you look historically at this. Now, that does not mean it's now 27 years since we delivered the report. And in historical terms, that's a short time. But in a lifetime like mine, I was in the end of the 40s when the report was finished. And I'm now 75, and I'm watching what happens and what doesn't happen. You know, not as happy about everything that's not happening. In many of the areas that needed urgent change, not so much has happened. And of course, we have the climate issue hanging over us as a real threat. And the inability of global governance and countries in cooperation finding solutions is a real threat to the future of humanity, because humanity is dependent on planet Earth. So, you know, that is a tragedy. But then, as I have said that, I never lose my optimism. In September this year, the Secretary General has called a one-day full concentrating, a day of summit in the United Nations General Assembly week, where the heads of state and government are going to report to each other and to the UN about what they are doing on all the issues which are relevant to deal with the climate change issue. They're based on their national decisions, on their national policies, legislations, budgets. What are we doing and what are we achieving and what is the plan for the next 3 to 5 years? So he is trying to build from bottom up to something that the world has not been able to do in what we should have done, to make an agreement across the world about, committing to do certain things to save the planet and humanity. Now, since we haven't been able, the Secretary General is now doing his utmost to try to push from bottom up, because many nations, and certainly the one we are in now, doesn't want to commit to international agreements in this area. Yeah. So far has not been able to. There is a lot of opposition in the US to making real commitments. It comes from many sources, and I can go into some of those, but let me leave it. I think the audience here knows you are not doing what you should have been doing in this country on these issues. And the poor president is not able to get a majority behind what's necessary to be done. However, then you have the issue of the US and China, because for many years now, all the time since Secretary Ban came into office, when he has put global climate challenge as one of his major concerns, then the blame game has been going on between the US and China. The US representatives and US senators saying, we are not stepping up and committing until China is part of the answer as well. We are not undermining US competitiveness and having China move up and polluting more and more. Although, of course, the US pollutes per head 4 or 5 times more. Anyway, that blame game has been going both ways, and nations have been siding up behind them, saying as long as China and the US are not doing something serious, why should we? So I have a certain hope now that this bind can be opening up, that maybe US and China is ready to make some agreed commitments, the two of them. And if we listen to Obama and to the Chinese leader in September, maybe it could be a breakthrough that other nations cannot any longer roll up behind one or both and say, we are washing our hands, we are not doing anything, because we must move now.
Now, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released a report several weeks ago, their report, in which they noted that the burden of climate is falling disproportionately on the poor.
Yes.
That they're the most harmed, and of course they're the least responsible and the least able to adapt. What is our obligation to them?
Well, you know, that has been part of the whole puzzle of how to deal with this from the very start. From the Commission report in '87 to the recommendation that we made in that report that the world needs to come together at summit level in 5 years to take stock of what we have done, and we meaning especially the OECD countries, the rich world, who were the ones responsible for what had already happened. And so, in Rio in '92, we signed the Climate Convention, which is in a way exceptional in international history. A treaty signed, a convention signed after only 5 years since that report. Then 5 years after that came Kyoto. Kyoto was an attempt to then do what the convention told the rich world was responsible to do. So the Kyoto responsible countries were the rich countries of the OECD area. Some held back. The US withdrew the signature that Clinton made under Bush. And there were other countries that never signed, Australia, for instance. Now, that process made just some efforts. But then, as China, Brazil, India, South Africa, big parts of the forward developing world started moving into being, developing with higher percentage of economic growth, contributing to the sum of what's being polluted, sent into the air. Then they had to be part of the picture, not only the Kyoto countries. As time has passed, the Kyoto countries are getting down to 30% of the emitted, and then down to 25% soon. So we need the rest of the world to be part. And that's what's going on now, and which has been so difficult, which didn't happen in Copenhagen 2009. We were all hoping for some kind of global agreement. But one thing happened which was important. And it happened because several leaders, including Obama, worked hard for hours in a meeting together, trying to get at least the 2-degree agreement. No more increase in global temperature, average temperature, than 2 degrees Celsius by 2050. So that has been important. There was one result out of Copenhagen. And since then, this building up from bottom up has been going on. But I can tell you, as the UNFCCC, the negotiating system for the climate convention, the leader of that is looking at it. We are below 50%. When she sums up what every country is doing or committing to doing, the sum of that is still below 50. Mm-hmm. So, we need a major step forward in the meeting in September in New York, and we need more maturity across the world before the important meeting in Paris in 2015. That's what, so I'm still hoping, Jane, yeah.
So the Plenary report didn't just say what we should aim for, but also how we should aim, how we should do it. And it really presented the whole notion of a division of labor amongst private sector, private actors generally, but the private sector, the philanthropic and civic sector. As you look at the role that the private sector is playing in the whole issue of climate, aren't we seeing a normative shift, a shift in which private sector actors are saying we want to reduce our carbon footprint, we want to be pursuing the alternative technologies? What are we seeing coming from the private sector?
Well, partly we have seen in the last at least 10 years that the progressive parts of the private sector and several of the big multinational companies who have progressive leaders and progressive boards are saying what you just said and really are hoping for global regulation so that you can level the playing field in the right way, in such a way that companies can know that they can be competitive while doing the right thing. This is what now is a problem. Many companies, however, are moving because many nations also are having regulations that are pushing companies to make change. Like in Norway, where in 1990, we put a CO2 tax on the continental shelf of Norway. There was an outcry, you know, in Norway, but across the world, especially from every oil exporting country. How can this woman, prime minister from Norway, put a CO2 tax on her own exporting industry? How crazy. I mean, when I came to Rio then, in just a year or two after, every leader of the Gulf and other oil exporting countries of Latin America and so on lined up to see me. They were saying, why? You have to change that policy. You are undermining the future value of our oil resources. And I said, that's what needs to happen. Okay? And now we have debates across campuses in the US about divesting in the whole of fossil fuel sector. So, I mean, meanwhile, you know, in those 20 years or more, things are moving ahead. People are understanding how these things are linked together. And by the way, all the poor people in poor nations, and even poor people in rich nations, because people tend to forget them, they need energy, but they need renewable energy because the right to energy and the need for energy is fundamental. The Egyptian foreign minister was, when he answered you, he said, energy is important, in addition to small companies. Now, energy is important everywhere, and certainly in poor countries. They need clean electricity. Their children need to be able to read their lessons at night, not over a candle or some kind of fossil fuel lamp. And, you know, they also need better ways of cooking their meals instead of polluting themselves, their baby on the back, and while they are cooking their daily meal. Because that's what's happening now with the use of charcoal and other terrible sources of energy. So we have a sustainable energy question. Sustainable development and sustainable energy are linked together. And in the whole picture, women's roles in societies is absolutely crucial for sustainable development.
When you were elected prime minister at age 41, it was after a career in medicine. You're a physician. And so obviously what I want to turn to now is the role you played as Director General of the World Health Organization, because you took that Brundtland Report experience with you into it. And in fact, your approach to some of the larger health questions, health challenges, was to look at public-private partnerships. And in fact, Darren McKeever from the Gates Foundation is here. Tell us a little bit about the role that organizations like Gavi, that have just, you know, the Global Alliance Vaccine Initiative, that have emerged in the past decade, that have they're not only there to mobilize resources, but also to harmonize the activities of all three sectors in promoting global health. So say something about that experience.
Yes, you are right. You know, when I looked at WHO in the kind of the months before I entered and became finally elected as their new leader, as I was planning what kinds of reforms were necessary, it was exactly, I was looking at the WHO, its limitations in its ability to move large change and much larger amounts of resources into the crucial areas of preventing ill health, and of course also in dealing with disease. So because it was a center of excellence within the United Nations family, that's how it was born, how the Constitution is created. But of course we have no sanctions to put on any government if they are not pursuing a good, well-founded health policy. And if they don't put a health system in place that people can reach, and if they don't vaccinate their children, we are helpless in a sense. So we can give recommendations, we can argue, and I did, but I also knew I have to get global health issues onto the agenda of the leaders of government, not only to the health ministers, because they are usually at the end of the table in any government. So we needed to speak with the leaders of government, the foreign ministers, we also did that, and the finance ministers. In addition, we had to mobilize the private sector in a much more effective way. And there were people out there, as Gates and others, who were willing to listen and to be part of the answer to how we could mobilize much more effective action. So we worked, and the interesting thing for me, coming from a country where we have a strong state, we have a welfare state, but we have always, Norwegian governments in the whole of the post-Second World War period, when our economy has prospered and we have had a good development pattern and a good democracy, it has all been done with the participation of the employers and the employees, the labor unions, in such a way that we can have a harmonious development of our economy, and the social reforms are integrated in a way that we don't undermine the future of our economy. So this has been happening. So I was used to thinking about the private sector as part of the solution. And many people, public health people in the WHO and in UNICEF, other places, ooh, be careful about the private sector. They are businesses. They have only bottom line profit. Be very careful. We have to keep this in the kind of public arena. That was the attitude. And I can tell you, only when Bill Gates placed $750 million on the table and told me and Carol Bellamy of UNICEF that unless you go together and make a more creative, more effective institutions to deal with childhood vaccinations, which had been falling down, I'm not going to give this 750 unless these changes happen. And I was convinced that we had to mobilize the private sector in any case. So for me, it was wonderful, but it gave me an instrument to tell my own people and to tell the people of UNICEF and Carol, this is how we can now really move creating Gavi, and we did. And we listened to the experiences of the private sector being results-oriented, in addition to socially consciousness that is basis of thinking in the UN system. So combining them, we managed to move this up and have much greater results. So millions and millions of children have been vaccinated because of this. I'm using it as one example because Gavi was the first major attempt. Then came the Global Fund to fight tuberculosis, malaria, and AIDS, and other institutions of this kind. which adds to the efficiency of the whole system. And it doesn't undermine the United Nations. This was one thing that many people believed. This is dangerous, Gro. Because look, we have no longer control over the vaccination agenda, etc. I said, look, we are going to be the center of excellence. We are going to be able to be the knowledge base, the evidence base, the system telling the world about what the correct protocols are and what needs to be done. That's the crucial role. And then inspiring others to come to the table and help have this happen.
And of course, I mean, one of the big challenges of global governance is, is the need for new institutions, right? And Gavi and Gain and others are perfect examples of a social innovation that's catching up with the kinds of challenges we face. Staying with health for a moment and going to just good old national governance, let's talk about the role of good governance. I'm thinking about, for example, a situation where polio is almost eradicated. Almost eradicated, but there's no such thing as almost. I mean, you don't
it
right.
Almost, yeah.
But almost doesn't do you any good. You have to get there. And but it's in where you still see outbreaks is where governance is weak. And let me just sort of put a sharper point on it. We've had new reports of polio in Syria where it hadn't existed. In the midst of civil conflict. So say something about the role of governance and the strengthening of health systems as well.
Yeah. So I was saying that, basically health systems and basic education are crucial parts of any democracy or any government, even if it's not democratic so far. So I think it's important to make clear to any nation, any government, that they are basically responsible for the fundamentals with regard to their own people. If we don't do that, but just take for granted that if countries are poor, then we have to help, which is good. But if that country thinks that it can, get funding from the outside for even the basic needs of their people long term, this doesn't work. We have to be able to convince governments about some basic human rights issues which are self-evident parts of any reasonable government. Now, that doesn't mean there are many poor countries who are not able to, even given that they are trying what I'm saying, they need our support. Maybe for years because they are so poor. And maybe there are some of those countries that are not so corrupt and where the elite is not taking all the money into their own pockets, which is another difficult issue globally. However, even then, we cannot stay back and look at people suffering. And in Syria, we have a tragic situation. And here, a country that has been reasonably well run compared to many others, is in civil conflict and war, civil war for years. And of course their system has broken down, which means that polio vaccination is not there in big pockets of Syria at the moment, because the people who used to be doing this are no longer there, they have fled, or the international community are helping doing it, are not allowed or dare to come. So we get these pockets of difficult and dangerous health consequences of conflict. And other parts you can have issues, for instance, with polio vaccination because of misuse of religion. Trying to spread on a religious basis to poor parts of a country, don't get your children vaccinated. This is the Western world trying to stop your reproductivity. I mean, we had that in parts of India. We have had it in parts of Nigeria. And it's been very tough to overcome. Because when people have campaigns, into populations, scaring them, it really takes a lot of effort and many people to overcome those kinds of barriers.
And of course, in the case of Pakistan, a health worker was used to gain entry into
Well,
bin Laden's.
Pakistan, yes. I should, when I said India, Pakistan certainly too.
But there was a situation where distrust of health workers and went on the rise.
Even get killed, yes.
Which was really, really sad. We're focused on philanthropy here. Increasingly what we're seeing, I mean, you talked about whether philanthropy is there to undermine governments or to strengthen them, and increasingly I'm seeing incredible sophistication on that question, and that there is an effort, for example, particularly in the area of global public health, to strengthen the health ministry, strengthen their capacity in the process by sharing data, giving them what they need to do their job well. I shouldn't say giving, but sharing.
Yeah.
And in the process, where are you seeing the greatest positive effect from that kind of effort to strengthen health systems?
Yes, it's right that, some years ago, the Secretary General also took an initiative about global health issues, trying to ask us, where are now, this is only like 4 years ago or so, in the pursuance of the Millennium Development Goals, what now needs to have stronger focus so that we can get to our targets. And one of the things that there were two main issues that then were debated and he supported and took issue was that we need to help develop health systems, and that needs to happen with the support of countries, communities, businesses, philanthropy, donors, everything, because unless that is better based across the poor countries of the world, then the efforts we are doing on trying to fight a number of diseases and prevent, in the first place, tragedies is going to be undermined. Then it was mother and child. So the 2 Millennium Goals linked to mother and child were focused, in addition to health systems, broadly speaking. That has led to more collaboration in many areas across the different entities that are involved. And this is important. And by the way, Jane, I was speaking with a venture capitalist a couple of weeks ago who came and brought me to a meeting, and we were speaking in the car. So I said, how do you define social
social innovation, social enterprise.
So Skoll, I was talking Skoll Foundation.
Yeah, social enterprise. Yeah.
Social entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting discussion again about this. But it ended by me saying to myself and to him, now I am more scared about the definition. If you say philanthropy, social entrepreneurship, and then governments and institutions, whether national or international or public institutions, and private companies. I mean, you have, but in this business, the private sector of this, I am getting more worried when I listen to some people that the companies who are private companies and that have basically bottom line profit as their goal, if they start thinking that philanthropy, governments, and then the social entrepreneurs are responsible for all the social and environmental needs, so we can continue doing or more limited, arena. That's really dangerous, because that is what was the case until 30 or 25 years ago. When I came to Davos in the end of the 70s, early 80s, the general melody in the whole of the multinational and business companies who were there at the World Economic Forum, any issue of social, environmental, or global aspect, they said, oh, that's up to governments. We are having a bottom line profit. They never say that the last 10 years. They have understood that business, and I'm now talking regular business. They now know, certainly the most progressive of them, they have to be part of also taking care of social and environmental issues, ethical issues in the way, and you spoke about this in the panel just before the Egyptian minister was here. Because this would be very, if we help from philanthropy, from social entrepreneurs, and the big part of business, multinational, everywhere, is going to take for granted that they can lean back and it's not our issue. That's dangerous, because what we need is everyone stepping up to the challenge, because it's the sum of what all of us are able to do, from the government, from the local community or local government, to the private sector totally. That's what it will help us as quickly as possible get to sustainable development. Yeah.
So, I'm sure you figured out by now that Jean Kufuor could not be, we were connecting by video conference and we run into technical problems on the Ghana end. But I wanted to just close with a question and a close. First, please stay right after this for a musical ending, because I think it'll help you leave with hope. But also let me just call attention to, Toby had a big effect on me. You weren't here, Gru, but he told us to raise our hand if we were over 60 or hoped one day to be over 60. And there was a remarkable number of hands went up. And we always think, because you became prime minister at age 41, we always think of you as somebody who broke, and the first woman, you break every glass ceiling. But now you're a member of the elders, officially. And what we're seeing, it feels like we're seeing a redefinition of service grow. You've got, Jimmy Carter, Tony Blair, Kofi Annan. Jean Kufuor is also somebody who's really redefined service, and you have Ernesto Zedillo. I mean, you can go all around the world and find people who were heads of state, who instead of retiring to a lovely life by the seashore, choose instead to take the knowledge they developed and the leadership skills that they almost innately have, and apply them to the world's toughest problems. So I guess I turn to you, and first of all, I can't imagine you retiring. It's just an impossible thing to even imagine. But have we fundamentally changed our notion of service, our sense of obligation to the larger whole, so that we no longer put it in this job or that job, but instead have it take us from the beginning to the end of our lives?
Well, yes, maybe, Jane. I think, you feel responsible that using your experience, you make the contributions that you can do at different stages of your life. And that never ends. You can always make a contribution if you are reasonably in shape and healthy to be able to do so. So you continue saying yes to the kinds of challenges that you can contribute to dealing with. And the other issue, when you speak about all these former leaders that you mentioned some names, I'm sure it is easier to continue working for international concerns that you have been learning about and dealing with, to try to have addressed during your life in public service, when there are other leaders from different parts of the world who are active and willing to do the same. Because it means you continue having a base of contact and friendship and inspiration from other people who are feeling the same way. That helps, because as an individual on your own, it's not so easy to do this. So for me, the elders has been a new inspiration. Most of those elders were people I knew, had worked with. And of course, we are inspiring each other to be able to do things even if we are 75, 80, or 90, which is the case of Jimmy Carter, somewhere this or next year. But the man is full of energy, and he will never step down until somebody else decides that.
So Please stay for the music. I want to tell you, we will be, I don't have time to do a summing up from the working groups, although we have it, and so we were going to email it to you and keep that conversation going. And really thank you. Everybody in this room is such an extraordinary expert and such an extraordinary giver. Whether you're a philanthropist or leading an NGO or a social enterprise. And the world is so much better for it. So what we all feel is gratitude. So thank you to all of you. And I think we have to slip off.
Yeah, that's fine.
This is cute. To whom? What's the name of the group?
The colors of the world should be loving each other wholeheartedly. Yes, it's all right. Take my message to my brother and tell him twice. Can you feel it? 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 Can you feel it?
If all souls were brought here to care, why are there so many crying? If all souls were brought here to love, why so much needless dying? The earth is one country and mankind its citizens. Let us raise a flag of our one human nation. Bury the hate and water with love. It's time to bring in the world. Bring in the world to a place of harmony. Bring in the world to a place of unity. As we wrap our loving arms around this changing earth, we can bring in the world. Your way is not like mine, so why do I feel like I know you? We're worlds apart, yet here in my heart, I'm gonna keep moving towards you. I'm gonna keep moving towards you. Ooh, oh, the earth is one country and mankind its citizens. Let us raise a flag of our one human nation. Bury the hate and water the love. It's time to bring in the world. Bring in the young to a place of harmony. Bring in the world to a place of unity. As we wrap our loving arms around this changing earth, we can bring in the world. Bring in the young, the old, let your story be told. The near, the far, whoever you are, the wrong, the right, we don't have to fight. It's time to bring in the world. Bring in the young, the old, yet the story be told. The near, the far, whoever you are, the wrong, the right, we don't have to fight. It's time to bring in the world. Oh, back on. Time to bring in the world. Oh, help us, help all of us to bring in the. Oh, bring in the world. Oh, bring in the world. Oh, help us to bring in the world. Oh, bring in the world. Oh, bring in the world. Oh, help us to bring in the world. Oh, bring in the world. Oh, bring in the world. Oh, help us to bring in the world. Oh, bring in the world. Oh, bring in the world. Oh, help us to bring in the world. Oh, bring in the world. Oh, bring in the world. Oh, help us to bring in the world. Help us to bring in the world. Help us to bring in the
I'm going to slip between you. This is microphone. This is the Oakland Interfaith Gospel Choir, joined by Gary, and thank you to our leader here. Thank you to Terry. Really wonderful.